the cloud. Okay, we recording. All right. Cool. So let's see. Testing SQL queries. Yeah. Oh, geez. I'm recording. I always forget at least one of those. So great. Now we're recording. Yeah, you can go to the Zoom channel. I posted it in the phase 1 Slacks. Boom. All right. Testing SQL queries. Cool. So I'm just going to make this a little, oh yeah. Let me do this real quick. So I'm just going to make a little application that does a couple of simple SQL queries, and then we'll write some tests for those queries. And if we have time, we'll do like a full integration test for that thing. Cool. So npm init. No. Oh. All right. Is that good? Yeah. Sure.
One thing, Christmas.
You could just also just be on Zoom.
For the live version.
The live version. Yeah. I know, it'll be like a half second behind or something. Testing SQL queries version 2.0.1. Great. All right, now we have a package JSON. Cool. Sweet. So what kind of app should we make? Should we just make a to-do list or what? Should we make something more fun? What should we make?
Make a video store.
I don't want to do that.
Make a bookstore.
Movies.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Sure. Okay, let's do that. Great. Okay, so let's make, well, because we always do that. We only have like 2 ideas in this whole space. It's like a to-do list or a movie app or a bookstore. Events? Sure.
Concert locator.
Sure. All right, let's do a timeline with some events. So cool. So we're gonna need the PG package because we're gonna do some Postgres, and then we're gonna also need Mocha and Chai. And I'm going to separate my commands and my queries. It's a pattern I like to do. It's one of many patterns, but I'm just going to try to keep separate like the commands versus the queries because I want to easily know the difference between like when I'm just reading from my database and when I'm writing, when I'm making a change. So the things that are safe to do as many times as I want versus the things that actually change the world. So I'm going to make a directory called database, and inside of it, I'm going to put commands and queries. Cool. And then we're going to make a test directory, and I'm going to make a test database, and then we're going to make queries-test.js. Cool. So here's where I'm going to put my queries, and then here is where I'm going to test my queries. So we'll split screen that. Cool. So in here, I'm going to export an object that has all these functions that do different queries. So module dot exports equals an object, and in here we'll say get all events, which will be our first function. And it's we're not gonna use promises, we're gonna use callback. And now we need to set up Postgres. So I don't remember how to do that with the PG gem. So I'm gonna go here. That's super not helpful. How about documentation? Here we go. So this looks like a simple way to get started, but I really want to give it a database name. But it's got to be something like this. At least that part. This is the one that I really want, but how do you connect to a specific database name?
It's like C slash or slash C.
Slash C, I don't understand.
Well, it's like
Here we go. No, that's a SQL way to do it. I'm looking for the actual, here we go, this connection string thing.
right.
Here we go. So we have to make a pool, and then we have to make, or we can just make a client. There we go. This is what I want. Cool.
Oh, wait. Can you, so you don't need the whole thing?
The whole what thing?
Like that whole that they show there under connection URI?
I don't think you need this pool thing.
Oh,
I'm going to try it. I don't think you need it. And then we want our connection string is going to be simpler than this. It's just going to be localhost. What's the standard port?
5, 4.
Yeah, it's 5432, right? 5432, and then we'll call this testing SQL. We'll call my database testing SQL. Sure, queries. All right, so we don't need this so that should work, and then we connect, and then in order to do a query, we do client.query. So we're gonna do client.query select star from events. Something like that. Not sure if it's going to work, but we'll test it. All right, any questions about this file here? Okay, let's see if it works. So I'm going to just make a schema here real quick. And what is it? Create table events. I can never remember how to do a create table. So useful. Doesn't this make everything extremely clear on how to create a table?
all Postgres.
Here we go. An example. Okay, create table events, and we want an event to have an ID. Why are you bouncing? That's going to be what? A primary key.
Maybe serial primary key.
There we go. Thanks. And then an event will have some sort of title, which will be what else do events need? Like I started at, which will be a date, and ended at. Sure. Something like that. What's up? Oh, venue, yeah. No, we'll just be super general. And then let's insert into events. Anybody remember the syntax for this? For insert into? I have the hardest time remembering Postgres syntax.
It's entered into the table.
Into events, values. And then you can give this as in like a comma separated array, right? Okay. Let's see the ID. What's up?
But you have to also specify the columns in the same order as the separated array.
You do have to, by default it wants them like this. It wants them in the same order, right? So I want to let it do the here we go. So you can say, before you say values, you put like the things you care about. So I'm just going to do these things. And then down here, we can do started at, and now I need to figure out how to do a SQL date. Looks like this will work. Cool. So 2017, 07, 25. Let's say this ended at, let's say it started yesterday, ended today, and the title is Phil made coffee. And the description.
Yeah, that's right.
So we never forget
All right, let's see if that works. So we're going to create DB. What did I call it? Testing SQL queries. And then we're going to say load the schema. And I probably forgot a semicolon. And what you say? What?
There's a column I can insert into.
No, no. This column does not exist. That's not what I want. Did I not say values? I did. Insert into films, values, blah. Insert into films, columns, values. Insert into events, paren, things, values. That looks right to me, right? Does that look right to you? Oh, I think these all have to be single quotes. Let's try that. Oh. There we go. Okay. Anyone remember the like drop table if exists? Like that? Or is it like that?
No, it's dropped. I think it's dropped people.
Like that? Okay. Sweet. All right, let's check it out in Postico and make sure that I've got one. Where is it? Here we go. Cool. So now we have an events table with one event in it. All right, great. So now let's see if our query works. So I'm just going to test it manually here. I'm going to open node. I'm going to require /database queries. And then I'm going to say get all events and then give it a callback with an error and a result. And I'm just going to console log that. Cool. And it looks like we got back something. And it did get rows here. Yeah? So I think this is enough for us to write a test. So we're going to go into here and we're going to say describe our queries object. And then we're going to put another describe in here for the query, which we get all events. And we're going to say it should result in all rows in the events table. And we need to require it, so we need to go const queries equals require dot slash database queries. Cool, and this is going to be an asynchronous test, so I'm going to get the done callback here. And we're going to say queries dot get all events, and we're going to pass it a callback where we're given an error and otherwise events. And we're going to say if there's an error, we're just going to return after calling done with the error, because that'll fail our test. Otherwise, we'll expect events to be an array, and we'll expect events.length to equal 1. And now we'll just run Mocha. Test file's not found. Maybe it's tests.
Oh, I think you have to call the folder test.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought there was a default. I thought it was the default.
So you're calling it tests. So,
And it has to be test?
yeah, I don't know.
Well, I didn't know either. That's why I tried both. Oh, I know why. Because Mocha by default does not do like a recursive.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Mocha recursive. Great. Great. So in package JSON test will just become Mocha recursive. So now we can do npm test. We get the expect problem. So this is just because I didn't require expect. Great. So we got back an object instead of an array, but it did the query and it worked. And the reason we got back an object is because that's what PG does. So here, this is actually the result of the query, and then we want the result dot rows, I think, and then we should get that. That's where the actual rows that were that came back from the query are. And it never came back. Oh, did I not call done? Yeah, I didn't call done. Oh, wait. You're right. I did not call done here. Good catch, Phil. Great. So we've got one passing test. And I kind of just slapped a lot of this together. There's some other stuff. There's some like a little bit of refactoring we need to do for this. So I'm actually just going to save this real quick.
Can you explain the difference between like equal and deep equal?
Yeah, equal and deep equal is just is like if you try to compare two arrays, they're not equal unless they're the exact same array. But if you want to make sure that the arrays contain the same information, so it's a different kind of equality, right? Like two different arrays with both that contain 1, 2, and 3 in them are different arrays. They're not the same array, so they're not equal in that sense, but they contain the same information, so they're equal in some other sense, right? So deep equal just means like go through the values in this either object or array and make sure that they all match.
Oh my gosh. Just. Oh.
Okay, all right.
Is that similar to double equal and triple equal?
No,
It's not.
no.
Because that's-
Double equal and triple equal have to do with typecasting and
yeah, so
coercion,
type and equal value.
right?
That is where
So if you're using double equals, I think you can do like the string 1, 2, 3 is double equal to the array 1, 2, 3 because it'll try to typecast it, but maybe not. Let's see. What is this? It's going to be some slightly different array, right? So if we just add a string to this, it becomes that. There we go. So the string 1, 2, 3 double equals the array 1, 2, 3 because it coerces it. What did I just do? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to make that clarification.
Yeah. So double equals, triple equals is different from deep equal, which is deep equal. In order to implement deep equal, we actually have to walk through the array or object, right? And I'm not sure in Chai's deep equal whether how many levels deep equal goes, right? So like if it encounters an object within both of those arrays, does it walk through the properties of that object? And then when it walks through the properties of that and it encounters an array as a value, does it walk, you know what I mean? Does it go all the way to the bottom of every object? I don't know. I doubt it walks the whole tree, but we could play with it and find out. I don't know.
Yeah, so apparently in the documentation it just says clauses all equal include members, keys, and property assertions that follow in the chain to use equality instead of strict equality. And then there's an actual deep equal project page. Equal the deep equality algorithm.
Which is probably a recursive algorithm. Okay, so we've written one test, and that's great. But our test currently relies on the fact that I loaded the schema, and the schema file that I made had like a record in it, right? And when we're testing SQL queries, we generally want, the number one thing you want in your tests is consistency. You want to control as much of the environment and the world and the state of your application as possible so that you get the same deterministic result, right? So if I were to go in and just delete Phil's fake event, and then we run our tests, it's going to fail because it's currently relying on the state of my database, right? And the state of my database isn't persisted in my code anywhere, so tests might pass or fail using one database where they might pass or fail differently using a different database. So what we want to do is set up our test environment so that we're doing two things. We're isolated from our development environment. And that's nice because every time you run your tests, you don't want your development environment to get emptied out. So we're going to need two databases. We're going to need a development and a test database. And then we're also going to need to do some setup code that says before every single test, restore the database to some known state. And the easiest known state to start with is just empty. We've got our schema loaded, but it's just empty. Yeah. So there's a few things I want to dry up here. Oh God, go away. First thing is that right now we're connecting to Postgres in our queries file, and we're going to need to share that with our commands file. So I'm going to do a quick refactoring here where I take this client setup code, and I'm going to make a new file in my database folder here, and we'll just call it client. And we're just going to do the client setup here, and then module.exports is our PG client. So this will be shared by queries and commands. So now, in order to get client, we just say, and I'm just going to call it PG in here, require./client. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. And now in commands, we'll later put that over there. Go away. Okay. We also need to change how we're connecting because this right here is going to be either our development database or our test database. Yeah. So yeah, so we're gonna decide what the database name is by getting the database connection string from let's see, connection string equals, and we're going to say if there's a process.env.database URL, we're going to use that. Otherwise, we're going to fall back to this default. Yeah? Can I what?
Can you explain that one?
Yep. So this is going to, if this environment variable right? Which you remember, it's like environment variables, right? It's currently not set in my shell. But if the database URL environment variable is set, we're just going to connect to that. Otherwise, we've got this default, right? And the reason I'm using this environment variable like this is because that's how it works on most deployment setups, right? If you deploy to Heroku and you ask them for a Postgres database, this is where they're going to tell you the connection string to connect to it. So if we make this change like this, and I eventually deployed this somewhere to a remote machine, this is how that remote machine's environment would know where the database was. And so I'm using that just because it's a pattern I'm familiar with. But what it's going to let me do is overwrite this in our test so that our test, whenever our tests run, we have a specific test database. So the way that we're going to do that is whenever we run our test command, we're going to load a Mocha config file, which is going to be in test / I don't know, setup or something like that. So we're going to load this. We're going to load this file first, test setup. So let's make that file. And it should let us, Mocha should execute this file first and then execute the rest of our tests. So in here, I'm just going to make sure that's happening. When we run npm test. Oh yeah. Is that not legit? I thought you could do that.
Are you trying a new line editor?
I tried to just wrap it, but it's fine. It should work like that. And so it did Mocha setup, and then it ran our tests. Cool. So we're still connecting to that default connection string. So in my setup file that I just created, we're going to say the database URL equals, and we'll give it a different connection string. Oops, what did I just do? Copy. And this is going to be testing SQL queries -test, whereas the other one would be like, this is now a really annoying name. So let's say we were just working on like, you know, a website or something. We'd be, you know, we'd be -test versus -development if we wanted two different database names. But I'm going to leave it the same, even though this is a little confusing, but just see this as a test prefix. Does that make sense? And we need to create this database and load the schema for it as well.
What is the recursive again?
Oh, it means that, so if you look in my test directory, I don't have just test files in here. They're nested under folders. So recursive just means look for test files that are in subdirectories. Yep. Okay. Great. So now we should be connected to the test database, which means if I run tests, it should tell me that the table doesn't exist. Yeah, there was an unhandled promise rejection. But that shouldn't have happened because it might have failed on the connection. But it still should have called my, it should have just called error here. And then in my test, I was expecting it to give me the error and then I could fail. But I don't think this is even getting called. What's up? What'd you send me?
I just said you could put a console log inside of it.
True, true. No, it's not happening, but it's okay. I think we just need to create this test database. Cool. And then we're gonna load the schema. And now run npm test. Great. Cool. Another thing we can do now that we have this setup file is make it a little easier for us in our tests. We don't need to require expect anymore because we can come into our database setup file and just say global.expect equals chai.expect. And we're going to do that just because I don't want to require expect everywhere. Mocha already makes like describe and context and it globals, so let's just make expect a global. And now in all of our tests, we just require the thing that we're testing and everything else should be set up. And that should still work. Great. We don't need this log anymore. Cool.
If you're doing the import, what does that look like? Off the-
What import?
If you're using import instead of require.
Yeah, I'm not, so let's not worry about it. Cool. So we just did refactoring so that both the client file that connects to Postgres is looking at something that's overridable, so that in our test setup file we can override that with a different database. So that's how we can load up our application and say we're gonna run this looking at a different database so that we can run tests. Yeah? Cool. So then we need to make sure that we're emptying out every table in our database before each test. So in here, I'm just going to put a global before each. And you can just put this here since it's a global. And this will run before every single test, no matter where they're listed. And so in here, we're going to truncate all tables. And then we need a done because this is going to be asynchronous. And so let's make sure that that's running. Cool. So how do we truncate all tables? Anyone know how to do that? No? All right, let's figure it out. Postgres truncate all tables. Good old Stack Overflow. Okay, this is like some code to like introspect on how many tables you have, but I know I only have one. I'm fine hard coding it, so I'm just gonna truncate one table, and I think you just say truncate table name. So I'm gonna say truncate events was our table name, right? And then we're gonna get an error or results. And I'm just going to call done. And if there's an error, it'll pass it an error, and our tests will all fail. Otherwise, it'll pass it null, and we'll just keep going. So this should truncate our tables truncate just the one table we have. If we had more than one table, we would probably need to do something to manage like doing sequential parallel queries to truncate all those tables, but we only have one, so it's a little bit easier. And this should make our tests fail because it's asserting that we have one event. Oh yeah, and we don't even have access to this PG object because we need to get it. So I'll make it another, well, I'm not gonna make it a global, but I'll make it a local PG equals require, and then .. slash up one down to database and down to client. Great. And so now we expected 0 to deeply equal 1. That error is because we no longer have the fill made coffee event in the database, right? So now we've got our schema loaded. We did that manually. And then every time we run our tests, before every single test, we're truncating our table. So fixing this test would just be make sure this array is 0, and then our test should pass. So now, so let's take questions about that, right? About this setup before each test to truncate all your tables. Does everyone see how all those pieces fit together, or should we walk through it again? Sure. So this only works if we run this specific Mocha command, right? We could, or at least something like it, right? So we need the recursive because our tests are nested, right? And then we need test setup to run this file first. So it sets up our test environment. And then this test is just this directory telling it where to look recursively for our test files. Okay, and so the first thing Mocha does is it runs our setup file here, which changes our database to our test database, makes a global expect, gets the client to our database, right? So this thing happens first, and then when we require the client, it's looking at this, right? If we had these flopped around, that would be a bug, right? Because it would have connected to the development database, yeah? So that's a dependency that's implicit in this file, that this order matters here, doesn't always. And then we have a global before that's gonna truncate the events table and wait until that happens successfully to do any of our tests. And then the only test that we have is this test here. that comes in and runs one of our queries. Okay? Yep.
You can also put like if you wanted to, you can put before each in different describe functions, right?
Put before each anywhere. If it's global, if it's outside of any describe, then it's a global, right? If it's inside of describe, it only applies to the tests that are within or lower of that describe. Yeah, cool. All right, sweet. So every time I make a test pass and I think everything's good, I like to take a pass where I go through and I make sure that if certain things were wrong that I can expect to be wrong, that my test will fail appropriately. So for example, we're testing, we just did a bunch of refactoring and some plumbing for our environment, but we're ultimately testing this. So what happens if I typo the table name? My test should fail. I want to make sure that that's going to happen. And I get a reasonable error message. The relation, which is another word for table, doesn't exist, right? So we know if someone borked that, then we'd get a good error. And I mean, I can't think of anything major that I would test. This isn't a very complicated query, but we'll get into a more complicated query. Cool. So here is get all events. And now we need some way of putting events into our database, right? So that we can make sure that get all events is actually returning something. Because right now our test is just saying it gets back an empty array, right? We need to actually assert that this is actually going to the database, right? So one way we can do that is we're going to put a before each in here. And in here, we're going to insert some dummy events to make sure that this query is getting them out. Yeah? So here we'll just say we need to do an insert of some events. And we don't have this PG object. Maybe I should make it global.
You're gonna have to, right? 'Cause you're gonna be using it.
Yeah, let's just do that for simplicity's sake. I would probably think on this some more, but we'll make a global PG that just allows our tests to have access to making queries here. So we need to do an insert. So we're going to say something just like this. So you can just put this SQL right in here with a backtick multi-line thing. And so we're just going to insert several events into here. What else? I need random brain generation. Anything?
Bye, Jared.
Well, this is historical event tracking.
Oakland needs dragons.
So solid.
Okay, so we should have 3 events in our events table, and now we're going to make sure that we have 3. Oh, I forgot done. It's just going to stall out. So I did pg.query, but I forgot. Oh, that's not how the internet. That's not how things work. Okay. There we go. Okay, and then done, again, passing it an error if there is one. Okay, it looks like it worked. Let's make sure. So the length is 3. Let's do events dot to deep equal an array of 3 things, which I know this is going to be wrong, but it's a little trick I like to do where I'm just going to come in here and copy these things because I'm pretty sure they're right. I'm checking them with my brain, but I'm lazy about typing them. And it's not going to be perfect anyway. It's funny that it doesn't put commas in there. Okay, and then these are actual dates. So I think for all these, we just want to make them like that. Oh no, they're gonna actually be date objects. Well, that's gonna be wrong, but let's see what happens, because it is gonna fail. I think it's just gonna tell us our dates don't match. Oh, and it probably wants some commas. God, maybe I shouldn't have copied this. It's like the worst. And trailing commas are fine. Okay, what do we get now? I missed one? Thanks. Okay, so the dates didn't match. Can you parse this date? Date parsing in JavaScript sucks. Does that work? It looks like it works. Okay, so for all these at things, I'm gonna try to just do new date and see if that makes the dates match. Ah, no. Okay. Okay, so this is, the date problem is a little frustrating. I want to fix the date problem, but you might notice that there's another problem here, which is that every time I run the test, I get a different set of IDs, right? I can't really do this big deep equals like this because I don't know what the IDs are. So if you want to do a giant expect like this, you can kind of do some things that cheat where you can be like, okay, I don't know the ID, but I'll actually get it from the source itself. So I know that this is not testing that this ID is a specific thing, but it's going to match it up. The other way we can do this is by breaking this down to multiple assertions about equality. But I wanted to see if I can get away with one big assertion here. And I just have to solve the date problem now. And they look the same to me, but there's something probably to do with like, oh, it's a time zone thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Ugh. Maybe I need the TZ07 part. Invalid date. Great. JavaScript. New date time zone. Not helpful. All right, well, this sucks, so I'm going to break it down to something that sucks less. So I'm just going to expect things about each thing. So we want to make sure that there's title is equal to what we expect, and description's equal to what we expect. Something like that. So this is going to take a little while. I'm probably not going to do it all. But we can keep going through each one of these things here and look at started at and ended at. And I'm not going to do them all, but you can see where I'm going with that, right? And then we can do it for all 3. And I'm not going to do it again, but there we go. So that way we can check just specific parts of this object, and we don't need to check each specific thing. We can also do a little bit of minimal checking where we should just make sure that ID to be a number. And there we go. And I would duplicate that for all of these. Sweet. So that is an example of a simple version of, we've written a query that reads from the database, we've set up our environment so that the database starts empty, and then we inserted some data and made sure that it came back out how we expected it to come out. I'm going to try and do one insert command, so different from just reading, but actually updating the database, but I only have 10 minutes, so we'll see if I can get through it. So query is going to be something much like commands, except we're going to be like create event. And this will take the event and a callback. And here we will do something like insert. I'm just going to go copy this other insert. So like insert into events, values, and this is where I actually don't know how to do. Y'all have used the PG gem before, or the PG package before? Does it support interpolation?
I have not. You know, it's funny. I have not used the PG package as much as the PG promise package.
Yeah, I've used the PG promise package, but I think it gives some other stuff. Guides. Let's see. Node Postgres. I'm going to search this whole domain for insert. You ever done this trick before? Or if you do a Google search like this, it'll just search this site. So is there an insert? Here we go. Insert into user values $1. Okay, cool. So there's something like this that we can do for string interpolation. So then this is just going to be $1, $2, $3, and $4. And then we're going to say returning star. And then the second thing is going to be an array of the attributes. So these things. So this function expects that you give it an event with these 3 properties, and we're going to take those things and we're going to pass them in as these values. Need commas here. And then we have our callback. Cool. So we've got our query. We've got our values for that insert. And then we've got our callback that will return this. Although since it's a single input, right, we're just creating a single event. I'm just going to take the first row that came back, because there's only going to be one row because we only inserted one thing. Make sense? Any questions so far about this insert? No? Okay. So we need to duplicate. I'm just going to duplicate this file and make it our commands test file, just so I don't have to redo everything. And this will be commands, and this will be create event. And I don't think we need a before each, because we can start with an empty database for this, or an empty table. So we're going to say should insert an event into the events table. And we are going to get commands instead of queries. And we're going to do commands create event. And our event is going to be, somebody help help me come up with an event here.
Just find an
Until it's
alligator.
actual
Mom party.
Mom party.
mom party.
Summer party.
All right.
What we're doing, coming up with
Yes.
So let's see. The title is Mom Party. And I'm not sure that you can do this. What is it? Future or something?
Oh yeah.
All right, let's see if those strings get turned into dates for us. Cool. And then so we expect events, we expect event to be an object. And then we expect event.title to equal mom party. And we expect event.id to be a number. And let's see if this works. Okay, it appears to work. So now, again, this happens to me all the time where I write a test and I write the code and then it just passes and like I generally forgot something or something weird is happening, but so let's just make sure that everything's working. So because the way we have our test set up, this test ran last. So that means it emptied out whatever was in create event here. But if I come in here and I say dot only, one way that I can check that things are happening is I run my one test, and I should be able to go in here and see that event in my other database. Go away. In the test version of this, testing SQL queries test, in my events table, I should have that event. And see, I'm all the way up to ID 42. So we've been using the same database over and over. So it looks like it's working. Let's make sure that the started at .toString equals what we want. And the ended at toString. And this is fine for me because that's the right date, right? Friday, August 11th. And this should be Saturday, August 12th. Sweet. All right. So we have a test for reading our events and we have a test for inserting an event. I think that that's all the time we have, but I think that covers like the two major kinds of tests that you'll have and the setup for making sure that you're clearing out your database and that you're using a different database for your test environment. And those are the major pieces that I think are pretty crucial to setting up a good, healthy test environment. And you'll probably see something similar wherever you end up working. They'll have some test environment that has a test server or a test version of the database. It only gets more complex from here. If you know about like MySQL transactions, there's a way that a lot of test suites are set up to where at the beginning of every test, you start a SQL transaction. And so all the stuff you do in your test, whether you're testing just queries or testing a full web API or a CLI or something, you can do things where you say open a transaction and then create 5 events and query for them and delete one and do all this stuff, but that's all happening within like a temporary transaction, which means the database is doing all that work, but in a way that is easily undoable and easily rollbackable. And then at the end of the test, whether it was successful or successful or a failure, we roll back that transaction. So that's one way of doing this. Other than just truncating all the tables, you can actually start your database in a specific state, do all your test work in a transaction, and then that just gets thrown away, and your next test is ready to go with the database back to where it was before. I don't have time to set that up now, but you might see that kind of setup as well. Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, you know, so on that trick you talked about for searching the site, you know, you can tap the URL and tab and search.
Sometimes